Welcome, Trojans, to our day one USC Financial Literacy Conference. This is the third annual Financial Literacy Conference we've hosted. It's a 3-day conference. Tonight, we're talking about money management and driving your finances. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about the EverFi platform that is a financial literacy platform that students and alumni can use, as well as the importance of credit scores and hearing alumni testimonials and success stories with finance. And then on our third evening, we will be back here on a webinar with the Vanguard group to talk about having a growth mindset. My name is Laurie Blake, and I'm the Senior Director for Career Engagement at the USC Career Center. Welcome, Trojans, to our event this evening. Our topic is Money Management 101, Driving Your Finances. We had an overwhelming response of students and alumni registered for this event, and the numbers are going up as I speak. So without further ado, this is an hour-and-a-half session. So we'll do an hour of Q&A between Ben, Justin, and Leslie, and then we'll open it up for Q&A to the audience. But I first want to introduce our esteemed panel. So one thing at the Career Center, we're not finance experts, but we know how to bring in the experts. And so tonight we've assembled a wonderful panel of experts to talk to our students and alumni. Our first speaker is Ben Markley, who is educator and content creator at You Need a Budget. Ben works for You Need a Budget, teaching people how money works and how to make it work for them. As a former high school teacher, he feels especially passionate about equipping young people with the tools they need to get the strongest possible start after graduation. You can find him showing beginners how to set up a budget on You Need a Budget's YouTube channel or teaching financial literacy on TikTok. And his handle is The Dollar Scholar. He lives in Lawrence, Kansas with his wife, Maddie, and son, Knox. And so please give a warm welcome to Ben. We'll give a virtual warm welcome to Ben.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ben, for joining us this evening. I know it's a little later than California time right now, so thanks for staying up and teaching USC Trojans about finances. Our next esteemed panelist is Lacey Chang, who is the Executive Director of UBS and USC alumna. Leslie started in the wealth management industry 22 years ago and has also worked at Morgan Stanley, Merrill Lynch, Bank of America. In 2005, Leslie graduated from the USC Marshall School of Business with an MBA in finance. She has the CFP, CFA, and CPWA designations and is continually expanding her knowledge in a rapidly changing investment world. At UBS, she has been recognized as a leader committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and she loves mentoring women in the business. Additionally, Leslie is passionate about education and has spent many years teaching finance, most recently at that school across town, UCLA. She is an advocate for financial literacy and strongly believes it needs to be part of every student's educational curriculum. So let's give a warm virtual welcome to USC alumna, Lacey Chang.
Thanks so much, great to be here.
Thank you, Leslie, for being here this evening. We met at the Financial Literacy Festival that Marshall hosted a couple weeks ago. So thank you, thank you. And last but not least, our third esteemed expert panelist for this evening is Justin Lacey, Resident Director and Wealth Management Advisor, First Vice President at Merrill Lynch. Justin Lacey started at Merrill Lynch as a financial advisor in 2017 and is located in Newport Beach, California. He focuses on working with executives, business owners, and families in designing strategies to help enhance, preserve, and transition their wealth. Mr. Lacey graduated magna cum laude from the University of Southern California, where he double majored in business administration and accounting. His previous work experience includes working at Deloitte, Goldman Sachs, and UBS. He holds the designation of Certified Financial Planner, CFP, Certified Public Accountant, CPA, Certified Private Wealth Advisor, CPWA, and Accredited Wealth Management Advisor, AWMA. Justin Lacey is a member of the Merrill Lynch Black African American Leadership Council, the USC Leventhal School of Accounting, Public Media Group of Southern California, and he enjoys traveling, playing basketball. He's an avid USC, Dolphins, Angels, and Lakers sports fan. So let's give a warm virtual welcome also to Justin Lacey this evening, USC Trojan. So I have some questions, and I sent these questions ahead to our panelists, esteemed panelists today. And we'll start with Ben. And Ben, the first question, you need a budget. People have heard about it. It's one of the premier budgeting apps that's out there that people can use as they manage their money and build their wealth. So my first question for you, Ben, is what are some of the ways You Need a Budget has helped its users take control of their money? How many users do you have? And how does the platform expand on educating its users on money topics?
Yeah, so YNAB, so when I first started budgeting back when I graduated college, I actually did the physical envelope system where you cash out your paycheck and you put it into a bunch of different envelopes, which I really liked, except for the fact that I had to carry a bunch of envelopes full of cash everywhere. And so what YNAB does is it really takes that system and puts it into a digital format. So what's really great about YNAB for me is I have it on my phone. So when I go to the store and I'm going to make a spending decision, I have it right there to look at, to check. We make YNAB really flexible so that if your priorities change and you need to move money, if you decide you want to spend maybe a little more on eating out than you plan to, we make it easy to do that without having any guilt. And we've been adding some really great features recently. One I'm really excited about, especially for this audience, is we just added a loan planner to YNAB, which is a really cool tool that helps you to kind of get whatever debt you may have together, and not only see what your interest rates are, but also see how much, if you were to pay an extra $10 a month, how much is that going to impact? How much time and money is that going to save you? And we've got lots of other things. We have a brilliant team of developers working on it all the time. So for me, YNAB has helped me to go from having a ton of student debt to having none. It's gotten me through periods of unemployment and lots of other things. And it's helped millions of other people do the same thing.
Thank you, Ben. My next question is for Leslie. As I mentioned earlier during their introduction, you and I met at the Marshall Financial Literacy Festival, which was an amazing event. And you had booklets on your table, Finance 101. What advice would you give our students in understanding the basics of money and debt management?
Thanks, Laurie. So yeah, that festival was really great. I'm really glad that Marshall decided to host that. And I met so many students, and the most common question that I got that day was, how do I get started? People they don't know how to get started. And then the next question that comes along is, well, then what should I invest in? So I'm really glad to see, I think the US is really, really coming to see how important financial literacy is. And like you said in my bio, I really do believe that this should be mandatory in our at least secondary, post-secondary education curriculum. My message that day and this evening is, really just get started early. When you're young, you really have the greatest asset, and that is time. I'm sure many of you have heard of the power of compounding, and they use the word power because it really is powerful. If you start investing today versus if you start investing 10 years from now, it just makes such a huge difference at the end. Maybe some of you have heard this common example that kind of illustrates this power of compounding is, if somebody were to offer you a penny today and tell you that, hey, it's going to double every day over the next 30 days, or would you rather have $1 million, which would you choose? And it's really hard to wrap our minds around the fact that, a penny doubling every day for the next 30 days actually amounts to over $5 million. And I know this is an extreme, hypothetical, because certainly investments don't double every day. But we also have this rule of 72 that we use in our industry. And the rule of 72 is, in the long run, we look at how the stock markets have performed over the last, call it century. And stock markets reliably can return sometimes close to 10% on an annual basis. And so if you take 72 and divide that by the expected annual return, in this case, let's say it's 10%, 72 divided by 10 is 7.2, right? So that means that it will take you 7.2 years to double your money. I'd say that's pretty good. In fact, we talked to a client today who is 50 years old, and this client is very wealthy already. He was an executive at a publicly traded company and has $10 million invested at UBS. And we told him conservatively, let's just assume a 7% annual return. And he said, okay, let's do that. Well, how much am I going to have, let's say in 30 years when I'm 80? And we did the math for him, and it's $75 million. So that's a lot of money. So power of compounding is real.
And we hear too, he's 50, but he can still quadruple, however many duples that money, right? From 10 million to 75 million.
Absolutely. Well, and then I just have to mention though that this power compounding unfortunately doesn't work so well when it comes to debt. And so that's why I think students especially have to be very careful with debt, because, even if you have a very small balance on your credit card, we know credit card companies charge an enormous amount of interest. And if you're just making the minimum payments, you'll quickly see that the compounding starts to add up, and it could take you many, many, many years to pay off even a very small balance.
That's a great point. So controlling our spending too is key. Wonderful. Justin, I have a question for you. As students start their first jobs and alumni transition to new opportunities, they're always presented with the benefits package or and that sort of thing, and not kind of knowing what to do. How would you suggest they participate in employer retirement packages? And I know some of our students are 21, they're like, 65, it's so far away, or 50, it's so far away. Like, why do I need to do that this year? So what advice would you give them?
Yeah, no problem. And first of all, thank you, Laurie, for having me come out, and it's great to be with these amazing panelists and be able to speak to all these fellow USC alums and students. First and foremost, as soon as you start making earned income, you can establish a retirement plan, right? Even minor children, as soon as they start making income, they can create a minor custodial IRA account, right? If you're above 18, you no longer need to be minor, you can handle it yourself, right? So as soon as you start making money, you can establish a retirement plan. And I highly recommend doing so. It allows you to be able to sock money away, potentially get a tax deduction, and be able to grow that money to be able to see the compound that Leslie's able to, create for her clients, right? So that's first and foremost. As it relates to employer retirement plans, yes, most, employers, once you start a job, are going to offer some type of retirement packages through the employer. So instead of it being an individual retirement account where you establish it separate from any employer, you actually go in with other coworkers and colleagues into an employer retirement plan. Benefit is one, there's tax benefits in terms of putting money away. If you put the money in like a traditional fashion, you get an immediate tax deduction now. You can do it in terms of like a Roth contribution where you don't get tax deduction now, but it grows tax-free and it will come out tax-free. And then additionally, a lot of employers offer an employer match. And we've seen with the whole like great resignation thing, employers doing all that they can do to try to, keep people in their seats and keep them happy and employed at those companies. So they're upping a lot of these employer match programs. So in an instance, like, if they do 100% match up to 5%, you put in, $8,000 in a year, they may give you a free $8,000, right? So, there's, we all talk about like, tax-free money and tax-deferred money and non-taxable money. That's all great, but the best thing out there is free money, and an employer match is free money. So definitely take full advantage. If your employer gives you a percentage match up to a certain percentage, 100% try your hardest to at least get to that amount to get to maximize the free money out there.
Great advice, Justin. Great advice. And should we skip a year or no? Be consistent.
Be consistent. Allow your money to compound so you can have you know, what, $50 million like Leslie's client at age 70.
Yes, that's amazing. Okay, Ben, my next question is for you. And again, we want to get down to the basics. And so the basics, and I know your app, You Need a Budget, gets to the basics. What are the elements that are included in a good budget? And is debt management one of them?
That's a great question. I think part of this, so when I ask people, you know, what is a budget for? Why do people have a budget? A lot of people will say like, well, I want to spend less, or I want to make sure I don't overspend, or I want to make sure I'm saving. And that's all great. But I think ultimately what a budget is about, it's about aligning your money with your priorities, right? You work hard to make the money that you make. And so you want to make sure that that's going towards the things you actually care about when you reflect on everything, not just what you might care about, you know, when you're driving by McDonald's with an empty stomach or something like that. And so one of the key things about that every budget needs to have is you need to put your priorities into it. And that means your immediate priorities, things like your rent, your groceries, the stuff you need to survive. It means your discretionary spending, or what most of us would call fun money, stuff that brings you joy in life. If your budget doesn't have any categories for fun, then you're not going to stick to it, which means it's a worthless budget. A lot of people, when I start talking about budgeting, are like, but I want to eat out, or I want to eat pizza, or I want to do this. And I'm like, you can do that. Budget, have a category for it, you know, have an envelope for it and do that. Now you can just do it with more awareness. But I think the third thing that a lot of people miss when they make a budget is making categories for long-term goals, or preparing for unexpected things, right? Things like car repairs, or your medical insurance, or putting money into your 401k like Justin and Leslie are talking about, making sure that those things are in your budget as well. So your budget shouldn't just be looking at your month-to-month expenses, it should also be looking at what you're going to need eventually, whether it's an annual subscription, or whether it is an emergency you want to be prepared for. And then the final thing I'd say is that your budget should be flexible enough to where it changes when your priorities change. I think a lot of people who have really bad experiences with budgeting, it's because they overspend, right? They set a category, and then it's supposed to be this perfect plan that they follow, and then they veer off of it. And now they go, well, I'm not disciplined enough. Budgeting's not for me. And even more people, I think, don't even start budgeting because they think, well, I don't know how to make a perfect plan for my money. And you're in good company. Nobody does. The problem isn't you. The problem is this idea that your budget has to be perfect and can never change, when in reality, your budget should be able to change with you. So for instance, a few years ago, I was looking for a birthday gift for my wife, and I stumbled upon some tickets for a concert. It's one of those concerts where they show a movie, but they play the live orchestra soundtrack. And it's for my wife's favorite movie, favorite soundtrack. And I'm like, this is the perfect gift for my wife, and I don't know if I'm ever going to get a chance to do this again, but it was $100 more than what I budgeted. So then the question is, am I going to just not do that because I didn't know back when I made the budget that option existed? Or does it mean I'm going to just throw the money out there and cross my fingers? Well, it's neither of those things. What it is I'm going to look at my budget. I'm going to look at where I have money elsewhere, and I'm going to look at all my categories and say, which of these things matters to me less right now than getting this gift to my wife? And I take money from whatever category or categories those are, and I move that over. And I don't have to feel guilty about it. I don't have to cry about it. I just acknowledge that trade-off and change the budget. And now my money is back in alignment with my priorities, which is what it's all about. So you need a budget that grounds you in reality, but it's also flexible when your reality changes. I think that's the biggest thing.
That's great advice. And with a budget, you tell your dollars where to go instead of your dollars telling, when you have that credit card debt, your dollars
Exactly.
tell you got to go pay Chase or whoever those bank cards are. Wow, that's really great advice. And I know we're getting a lot of really good questions in the Q&A as well. Leslie, and we'll get to those soon. Leslie, my question for you is, what financial concepts did you learn early? Again, back to the basics that helped you with your finances personally.
Well, I'll admit, I actually didn't know much about investments growing up. My parents did not invest in the stock market at all. They were not knowledgeable. As far as I know, all they had was a bank account, and they would put their earnings in at most a CD product, a certificate of deposit. So I didn't really learn about the finance world until I entered this wealth management industry when I graduated from college. I mean, I still remember my first job interviewing at Merrill Lynch when I didn't even know what the NASDAQ was because I had studied biology in college. But I still give a lot of credit to my upbringing for the way I am with my finances. I consider myself to be pretty responsible. I'm an immigrant. I came here with my family to the US when I was 7. And so what I saw was my parents who worked very hard and saved. That's kind of what I learned at a very early age, the importance of working hard and saving money. My parents never used credit cards. Everything was cash. And the only loan they probably ever had was a mortgage on the house that we lived in. So from that, I just learned never to live beyond my means. I never ever charged up a credit card that I didn't have the ability to pay off in full each month. So those are some of the things I learned. And of course, in my early 20s, when I did get a job in this industry, that's when I kind of just, wow, it really opened my eyes to, all the ways that you can really make your money work for you. And I took that opportunity very early on to just get started investing. So like Justin said, you have to start early. I opened up an IRA, at the age of 22 and started making contributions and so get started early.
That's great advice. So I see in the chat, Justin, we've had quite a few questions about student loans. And so we'll go there next because students will graduate and those loans will come due. Now, due to the pandemic, Congress has been postponing the payback of student loans. There's been a pause in paying student loans. In fact, recently in the news, we learned that loan deferment is extended until August 31st, 2022. Justin, can you give general tips or best practices for repaying student loans after graduation as they are trying to do a little bit of investing and pay their rent and make ends meet?
Yeah, so I think based on my calculation, I think this is like the 6th time that they've extended the postponement of when student loans need to be paid. So people are taking great advantage of it. Those folks that are no longer in the school where they accrued those student loans to be able to push those back. I know that there's conversation and some people have the expectation that there's going to be a student loan, debt relief, and, Joe Biden or, President Biden or someone's going to just, with the strike of a pen, just remove all of them. I'm not too optimistic in that outcome. And I do feel like if they were to be like a removal of student loans, they'd probably focus on individuals that are at the most need, have like lower income and massive loans. So, my personal recommendation is I wouldn't bank on that being forgiven long term. Now, I may be wrong, and I hope I am for the trillions and trillions that are owned, but I just don't think that's the reality. So I think for the most part, I think at some point in time, the people on this call are going to need to pay off their student loans themselves at some point. How to think about doing that? I mean, when you are in a position where you're out of school and you're starting to make income, there are different options you can choose. I definitely recommend talking to the federal loan people, and to ask them about your loans and what options there are. There's a number of different repayment programs within federal loan program that you can do. Some of them are income based, where it may be able to reduce the amount that you pay, and over a certain amount of years they may be forgiven based off of these programs, right? So that may be an option. You can also look to potentially refinance those federal loans into a private loan. interest rates tend to be lower, but they don't have some of the provisions like, like this deferment that took place over the past 2 years. If you had a private student loan that you refinance, you didn't participate in that, right? They still had their hands out and were like, okay, I don't care that we're going through a pandemic. You still owe me this money, right? So there's things that you give up when you refinance your loan to a private loan, even though the interest rate is lower. So I highly recommend kind of talking to a loan specialist or advisors about that if it makes sense for you. But then when you are in the position where you start kind of paying down, not only student loans, but even debt in general, right? And I'll just kind of group it all together. There's kind of two approaches that we recommend, and it kind of depends off of your, kind of own like psyche in terms of what makes the most sense for you. From a straight financial standpoint, the most efficient way to pay off student loans and debt is kind of the high interest rate approach, where you take the debt that has the highest interest rate and you focus on paying that off first, right? Someone asked in the quote, how do you kind of strike the balance between saving and paying off debt? The first step is understanding what the interest rate is for the debt and what the anticipated return is of the saving, right? So like if your debt is at 30% interest rate, then for it to make more sense to put $1 towards that debt in addition to like the minimum payments, right? An extra $1 on the additional minimum payments, it would only make sense to pay an extra $1 on that debt, right? If you feel like that 30% debt interest rate is higher than your potential investing it somewhere else, right? So a 30% hurdle on the debt interest, that's a really, really high hurdle, right? It's hard to find. I wouldn't confidently tell you I have an investment strategy where you can confidently earn 30% a year, right? Like I couldn't do it, right? So in that circumstance, I'd probably put all my extra discretionary income towards paying off the debt, right? Alternatively, if my debt was at 3%, right? There's a ton of different investment strategies that someone like Leslie could be able to offer you that potentially can provide a lot higher return than 3%. So I'd be looking at potentially putting that money, the extra money, to savings instead of the debt, right? So the interest rate approach is like the best kind of financial approach to it, paying down the highest interest rate first. The other way to think about it is they call it the snowball approach. And basically what that is you look at all the different debt that you have, and the debt that has, and you pay the minimum balance for everything, right? You always have to pay the minimum balance for everything, at least pay the minimum balance. You don't want your credit score to get hit. I know we're going to talk about credit score, but you don't want that to happen. So at least pay the minimum balance for everything, right? But after the minimum balance, the snowball effect says that the additional money you're putting towards paying down debt should go towards the debt that you have the lowest total value, right? So like, maybe you have a 20% debt at $20,000 and you have a 5% debt, but you only owe like $1,000, right? The snowball is saying, hey, even though it's a lower interest rate, it's a smaller amount. Let me just knock it out. Let me just pay for it. Now the next time I look at my statement, I only have my personal statement. I only see one debt item. I feel like I'm making progress, right? So that's more of a psychological approach where if it just helps you feel more motivated that you're making traction and paying off debt, maybe that's a better approach to be able to, to eventually become debt free over time. But yeah, to summarize it, like, find the debt payoff strategy that makes most sense for you, considering both the financial and the psychological aspects. And then, before you make major decisions about like refinancing to private or changing like the structure of your federal loans, talk to some very educated people in that space to understand the best path based off of your income and your financial position.
That's great advice. And I think you brought up an excellent point that you might get a lower interest rate refinancing your student loan debt, but then you're outside of the umbrella of protection that the government has been, offering to extend when you pay it back. That's a big.
Yeah, you walk into full-fledged capitalism.
Wow. So Ben, I have a question for you. Rent is a big portion of what people pay out, rent or mortgage or what have you. Mm-hmm. How much should you pay for rent as a percentage of your income according to You Need a Budget? Is there a recommended amount? I know you're in Kansas, Lawrence, Kansas. We're in LA. Yeah. I mean, the housing's different everywhere. What does You Need a Budget recommend?
So in general, at YNAB, we typically kind of shy away from telling people specifically what to pay. And part of that is because people's priorities are different. I have a really good friend who is going to live in a camper for the next handful of years and is going to be paying a lot less than they would be making. And that fits perfectly with her priorities. Whereas I know other people who are buying their first house sooner than maybe I would, or putting less down than I would, because having their own space is a priority for them. Now, the common kind of wisdom and something that I would throw out as a general number is 30% is usually considered kind of the 30% of your gross income. So the way to think about that is before taxes, whatever you make in a month, multiply that number by 3. That's how much you should be making, 3 times more than your rent before taxes. So for instance, if your rent was $1,500, you'd want to be making $4,500. And the reason for that 30%, that seems kind of arbitrary. The main reason I'd put that as kind of your ceiling is that that's what a lot of landlords use as their guidance. So a lot of landlords, if you are within that 30% or below, then you're going to be in a pretty good spot for consideration. If you're 40%, 50%, then you're going to make some landlords pretty skittish about renting to you because they're going to be concerned that you're not going to pay them back. So I think 30% is a solid ceiling. It's a good ballpark to go with if you're looking for a number. What I will say though is that there's this weird psychology thing with money where often when we establish a ceiling of like, oh, you pay this much of your income towards this, people tend to go right up to that ceiling. And sometimes you can't help it because you live in LA and it's just expensive to live there. But the thing I would say is, like you said, rent is one of your biggest expenses. So if you are able to get that down while maintaining your priorities, if it's ticking most of your boxes and you're only doing 20, 25% of your income, that if you can find 2 apartments where one's nicer, but the other one fits you just fine, and it's $200 less, that's $2,400 extra a year going into your pocket towards investments, towards paying off debt, towards all that stuff. So I would say before you go looking for apartments, I would say write down what matters to you, like what are kind of your immovables, and then what would be nice to have, and then look at those when you're comparing. And if you have 2 that both kind of fit, but one's more expensive, then look at how much money would you be saving if you went with a cheaper one, and just think about, yeah, would I rather have $2,400 extra in my pocket, or would I rather live in this nicer place? Either answer is fine. That's just what I'd recommend, because what we often find is as people's income goes up, people just assume that they're going to get ahead. They're going to have more money. But what we find is people's expenses tend to go up too, because when people get a raise, they tend to think, oh, now I can move to a nicer apartment, or I can get a nicer car or do whatever. And that's fine as long as you're doing it intentionally. But the problem is a lot of people aren't doing that intentionally. They're just kind of going, oh, I have more money, I can buy more stuff. And as a consequence, people aren't investing, or they aren't saving, or they aren't getting out of debt because their expenses are tracking right with their income. So like with anything, I'd say, yeah, 30% is a good ceiling, but your priorities, what matters to you in an apartment, should be driving what decisions you make, not what's the maximum I can spend, because that's a lot of money you could be putting towards your future or towards getting out of debt or whatever else you want that money to do.
And to stick with you for a minute, thank you. That is great information on the rent and what we should be looking at. And similar to what Justin was saying, it really is a math problem. You have to figure out times $200 times 12. What is that? What's that savings? Or paying the 30%, interest rate versus investing in something that's paying me 1%. Do the math. That's a really important factor. I'm going to stick with you for a minute, Ben, and I want to also talk about emergency funds, because we've all seen, I think it's a Progressive commercial, one of those insurance commercials, and Mayhem, and he's there and he, messes things up, and we're not ready for Mayhem to mess things up. We weren't expecting the flat tire. We weren't expecting the, whatever that is that comes up. How much should we be putting in our budget toward the emergency fund?
Yes, that's a great question. So when people talk about emergency funds, people often talk about savings or emergency funds. Some people use that kind of interchangeably. And there's a couple of things I like to talk about there. So first, a lot of these things that we like, the mayhem stuff, these unexpected expenses, often they're unexpected because we don't know when they're going to happen, right? I don't know when my car is going to make a noise and die. I don't know when I'm going to break my arm or whatever. but I do, well, hopefully I never break my arm. But most of these things, I know I'm going to need to replace my phone someday. I know my car is going to break. I know I'm probably going to have to go pay the doctor a good amount of money for something, right? It's just I don't know when. So the thing I recommend is when you have kind of this big blanket emergency fund, that's a great place to start, especially if you're just getting started. But what's tricky is if I have, $3,000 set aside for emergencies, and then I break my arm, and then my phone, dies, and I need a new one, then I don't really know, however much money I've just lost from that. I don't really know how well set up I am if my car breaks down or other things. Versus if you split those up into kind of the things that you're going to need money for, which for a lot of us, maybe less in LA, but like car repairs, medical expenses, things like that. When you have money set aside for those specific things, then if my car breaks down and I break my arm, and I know I've taken money out of my car repairs category, I've taken money out of my medical category, but I know I have this much money set aside for when my phone breaks or when my laptop dies. That gives me a lot more clarity about where I stand financially. So what I'd recommend for emergency funds, as far as like a number, if you're looking at medical, a good number to kind of go off of is look at your deductible, or if you want to be super aggressive, you're out of pocket. Those are kind of nice numbers to shoot for. With car repairs, think about how old your car is, how likely is it to need repairs soon. But the thing I recommend for people starting out, especially if you're just starting out with budgeting, is do one of two things. Either just set yourself a number and set yourself a goal for when you want to hit that number. And with YNAB, the app that we have, we actually make it pretty easy, where if you say, I want to have $2,000 towards car repairs by next November, if you type that in, then we'll tell you this is how much you need to set aside each month to do that. So you can do that, give yourself a number, and then cut that into chunks and just set aside that amount each month. So, if you want $600 for holiday gifts by December, starting in January, that's $50 a month to get you there, which is easier to budget for than $600 all at once. The way I like to think about it is you want to take all of your non-monthly bills and treat them like they are monthly bills. Treat them like you're paying a subscription for having peace of mind about your car, having peace of mind about your medical expenses. It cost me $50 this month to feel better about my car situation. And yeah, just break it into those chunks. If you don't know how much to save, just start setting some money aside. Just start setting aside $25, $50. Anything you set aside, it's going to be infinitely better than zero, right? And then ultimately, as far as like a number, the thing we always say to people is like, yeah, you can do a lot of math and you can do research, and by all means do that, but it's kind of whatever helps you sleep better at night. That's what I'd say. For some people, that's going to be a much higher number. For other people, it's going to be a lower number. But ultimately, what I think you're going after is you're going after that peace of mind. So if for you, that's, $1,000 set aside for car repairs, great. If it's $5,000 set aside for car repairs, great. But ultimately, I think trust your gut on that one and just know that you can always change your mind. You can always change your plan if you need to. But that would be my advice on that.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, and I appreciate that it is your budget. You're telling your dollars where to go. And even if you need to, shift the budget, that's okay.
It's actually
that's
smart.
your prerogative. You have freedom. You're not victim to your budget.
Yeah, a lot of people
victim to you.
A lot of people think that changing your budget is like an irresponsible thing to do, but when you're doing it intentionally, it's actually the responsible thing to do. It's the
responsible thing to do. Great. Well, I want to talk about next the finances and women, and this question is for you, Leslie. There was a MarketWatch article that says there's a male-female financial literacy gap, and I'm so pleased that in these 3 days we have women speaking at each of our days on financial literacy, including you today. And we know that women live longer than men and may sometimes have a rockier retirement. What advice would you give to our students and alumni to empower them to have successful financial futures, Leslie?
Yeah, so this is so important. And, I don't know if I would call it a financial literacy gap. I kind of see it more as a confidence gap. For some reason, women are just a little less confident when it comes to this topic. And like you said, yeah, statistically, women do outlive men. And so studies show that, 8 out of 10 women at some point in their lives will be solely responsible for their finances, right? That's because of the high rate of divorce. Some choose to stay single, or husbands passing away before the wives. And then what? Do you wait until then to figure it out? I sure would hope not. But that did happen in the case of my parents. My dad passed away, and he was in in the hospital bed still, writing checks to pay the bills. And I just remember just that sight is like permanently ingrained in my mind, that I just couldn't believe, like, this is, he's literally passing away and he's worried about paying the bills. And of course, because I'm in this industry, my mom had someone to rely upon. So we are trying to empower women, and at UBS we do a lot of research around this topic. And one of the most interesting things we found from our research over the last several years, that was kind of shocking, is that this sort of trend, I guess you could say, of women abdicating to men. This is still persisting even in the millennial generation. And that was surprising, because now, women actually surpass men in terms of college degrees and master's degrees. So we really need to change that. And I talk to women clients all the time, and I know they want to learn. They want to feel comfortable asking questions. And part of it is our industry doesn't make it easy, because we certainly use a lot of jargon. We make things sound so super complicated, and so I think it's often intimidating. And we also have a problem with our advisor population. Only 15% of advisors are women. And we need our advisors to be more persistent, I guess, to really welcome women into the conversation. Actually, it's funny, earlier today, one of the advisors in my office had emailed a prospective client, a really large prospective client that he's trying to win the business for. And he had left a few messages, and he finally, sent an email to the husband in this case. And the husband responded and replied, and actually looped in the wife and said, my wife needs to be a part of this. And when I heard that, I was like, oh my gosh, I love this. We don't hear that often, right? It's usually the opposite. The male client tells us, oh, my wife, don't worry about it. She doesn't really know about this stuff. And she doesn't want to be involved. But we do know women, we've surveyed them, the ones that, later on in life, we say, well, what is the one thing you wish you had done? And that was, and their response is pretty much, we wish we would have gotten involved a lot earlier.
Thank you, Leslie. And Justin, I know you talked about it. You talked about the credit score, and there's this 850 in the sky high. Ben talked about 3 times the rent we need, but we need to have the income of at least 3 times the rent or the mortgage or whatever. But we also need to have a great credit score. We're not going to get through the door. We can make 500,000 a year. If our credit score is 500, we may not get all the places we think we're going to rent. So what is a credit score, and how important is building a high credit score, and what is considered high, and how can someone find out what their credit score is, Justin?
All right. So I'm gonna give this disclaimer that I'm not a credit specialist, right? I know enough to be dangerous. But a credit score basically is an assessment on the confidence of institutions to lend someone money with the comfort that that person is going to be able to make the necessary payments and eventually return back the original amount that was borrowed, right? The higher the score, the higher confidence that the institutions and the credit agencies believe that you are going to be able to pay back that money. So high credit score range at the top is 850. I think the minimum is like 350, somewhere around there. But basically, credit score is a component of a number of different factors. It's around like 8 factors. The biggest factor in your credit score calculation is the amount of delinquent payments that you have. So if you got some credit card debt or a mortgage debt or whatever it is and didn't pay it by the required due date, didn't pay the minimum amount, that's a delinquent payment, right? If you miss a student loan payment, car payment, whatever it is, right? So that's the number one factor driving your credit score. There's other factors in terms of, what's your credit utilization, in terms of what's the max amount of credit that you have to borrow and how much are you utilizing of that. They divide the two, that's your credit utilization. There's the amount of time that you've had credit. And then there's some, there's hard inquiries and the amount of inquiries you've had on your credit score, right? So there's a number of factors. The biggest factor in there is the delinquency. So avoid being delinquent on any of your payments, right? Because that's going to hurt your credit score. Why a credit score is important, as Laurie mentioned, your credit score is going to dictate, one, the loans and ability to finance for certain opportunities, right? Your ability for a car company to say yes, you can have this car based off this loan. The ability of a seller willing to sell you a house based off of how well your credit score is and provide you with a loan to be able to finance that house, right? So it allows you to be either play in or not play in different things that you're looking to finance, because we don't pay everything by cash. It's not efficient. But also, even if you have a high enough credit to be able to buy a house, a high enough credit to buy a car, the credit score that you have is going to dictate how cheap it's going to be for you, right? So like, I'm at Merrill Lynch subsidiary Bank of America. We do a whole bunch of like mortgages and auto loans for clients. For our clients, the minimum credit score to be able to get a mortgage here is, I believe, it's either 620 or 680, right? Every 20 points that you're higher than, we'll say the minimum is 680, every additional 20 points that you have in the credit score reduces your mortgage rate. So someone that qualifies for a mortgage with a 680 credit score may get a mortgage rate of 6%. Someone that has a 780 credit score will be able to get that same mortgage, the same terms, the same house for like 4%, right? Much lower, right? And over the lifetime of like a 30-year mortgage, based off of like a $800,000 mortgage, for mostly in Southern California, where a lot of these homes are $1 million and you may need to have an $800,000 loan, right? That could be tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars of interest rate difference by just having a credit score that's like 80 points more, right? So just having a good enough credit score to be able to get loans is first step. Having the highest credit score possible to pay the least possible from these loans is the ultimate step, right? And we have 3 different credit card bureaus. Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion. I think those are 3.
That's correct.
So they all, there we go. Whew, once again, I'm not a credit specialist. So a lot of places, when they, like, if you apply for a mortgage, your credit score is usually the median of those 3 credit scores, right? So TransUnion gives you 800, Experian gives you 780, and the other one gives you 760. You're going to get the 780, the middle of the 3, right? So it's very, very important that you develop a high credit score for all those factors. And how can you check that? There's different sites out there. I'm not allowed, Laurie, to give like websites and stuff for things that are outside of Merrill Lynch, mymerrill.com or bankofamerica.com. They kind of have those handcuffs on me. But if you Google search or talk to someone like Ben or even like Leslie potentially, they'll let you know about the different like credit score companies that you can be able to utilize. And a lot of them are free to access. And a lot of banks, right? Like at Bank of America, we have a partnership with one of the credit bureaus where if you have a Bank of America account, you can pull up your score from that one credit bureau. So that's an option as well.
Thank you so much. And I know part of this talk too was about why it's important to negotiate a salary. I mean, we're talking here about, taking less of an apartment and saving money, or not going to Starbucks every day, and how much is that saving me a week and a month? We're talking about all these little things. If we look, if we take care of the pennies and the quarters and the dollars, we're going to save money and build wealth and savings and all that. So a part of that, and I'm in the Career Center, so this is what we do. We encourage our students to negotiate their hourly rate, if it's an internship, to negotiate a full-time job offer, entry level, or with our alumni, we encourage them to negotiate as well. How can negotiating, and it is a skill, And I'll start with Justin, and I'd love to hear from the three of you. What are some of the ways that you've seen people negotiate successfully, Justin? What steps could students and alumni take to learn how to negotiate? Because it is a skill. And, you know, even if they negotiate $1,000 or $2,000 more dollars in their salary, and then they end up staying 10 years, well, you know, do the math. 2 times 10, that's $20,000 they have in their pocket from opening their mouth. So what are some of the ways that you've seen people successfully negotiate, and what steps can our students and alumni take?
Yeah, I'll do the first stab into it. So first of all, you know, the key to negotiation, or a very important ingredient to negotiation, is having leverage. So if you're in a position where you have, you know, you put yourself in a position where you have multiple job offers, especially multiple job offers in the same industry and role, that provides you with a lot of bargaining power, right? To be able to, if you have an offer for $70,000 at one company, $80,000 for another company, to be able to go to that $70,000 company and say, hey, you know, I'd love to work here, but I'm getting an offer from, you know, another firm doing a similar role where I'm getting paid, you know, a meaningful more, right? A meaningful amount more. And, you know, it's not about money. I really care about the opportunity. I think there's unique things about this, you know, company A that really, you know, intrigue me. But at the end of the day, I need to make the best decision for me, not only from a fit standpoint and a coach standpoint, but also a monetary standpoint. Is there anything that you can do to be able to help be more competitive? They're not going to gripe at you for making that type of assessment, right? So having that leverage and being able to leverage other offers you have, I think, is very important. You know, I think people are a whole lot more transparent in terms of, like, I feel like people like within the millennial, or actually some of you guys are like, what, the Gen Z? That's lower than millennial, right? Yeah. So I think more people in like the Gen Z and even like millennial, my population, I feel like we're a whole lot more transparent with our like friends about like how much we're getting offered for like different jobs. Like when I was graduating in 2011, like everyone was telling me how much they're making at different, you know, big four accounting firms and finance companies, right? So that's leverage as well, right? If you know, once again, you know, it's always good to be able to negotiate when you already have other options. But if you even say, hey, like maybe you're getting the same offer at each of the companies, $7,000 all across the board, but you know of other friends that are getting $80,000, $90,000 in similar type of opportunities, that can be something that you bring up as well. Because like, you know, once again, the same type of speech, and just bring up the fact that, you know, you're familiar with other people that are, you know, getting, you know, a little bit higher compensation at some of your competitors. That's a great opportunity as well. Think about that. Also, this is not going to be, there's probably like maybe like 5% of the population here. Actually, but no, we some grad school people here as well. So also consider that there's more ways to get paid than just a base salary, right? So you can negotiate and try to improve your base salary, but don't forget, you can potentially try to increase your target bonus, right? In terms of what percent you may get if you hit certain metrics. And also you can potentially negotiate getting equity compensation, things like stock options and RSUs and stuff like that. And I work with a ton of like, you know, senior level executives, and the way that they got wealthy is from getting all the equity compensation, like stock options, RSUs. Their base salary through the 30 years of their career probably provided like 15% of their wealth. 85% were provided by the equity compensation. So that stuff can be very, very fruitful if you work at a strong company that's continuing to grow and the price of the stock is continuing to grow, and you're smart about the way that you're efficiently leveraging that equity compensation. So think of all three of those areas: base salary, bonus salary, and equity compensation are ways for you to be able to potentially, you know, negotiate a higher compensation for the value that you bring in these organizations.
Those are excellent points to look at all three of those. Leslie, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, it's I wish I had known to do this much earlier in my career, because I would have. But I'll share a personal story. So this year I was recruited by another company, and they asked me, they said, you know, what are you looking to make? And I threw out my number, and they actually said, okay, we'll pay you 50,000 more than that. And there was like no negotiation, you know, it was literally, and the reason I'm making this point is because this is probably one of the best labor markets I've seen in my entire life, where, you know, candidates have extreme leverage because there are so many job postings out there. I mean, I can post a job and get 0 applicants. I've never seen anything like this before. So it's really hard to get talent right now. And when I was there for the Financial Literacy Festival, I was talking to one of the professors at Marshall, and he actually was saying, "Oh my gosh, it's getting to my students' heads. They are just asking for the world and thinking they can get everything." I'm like, "Good for them, this is the time." But I would echo kind of what Justin said, is you kind of just have to make sure you do it respectfully. I had an intern ask me last year. I offered him an internship in my office, and I think the offer was maybe, I think, $20 an hour. And he came back and said, "Can I get 30?" And some of my colleagues were a little turned off. They said, "How dare this student ask for $30 an hour? They're a college undergrad student." And I said, "No, actually, I think it's great. Why not?" And in the end, we couldn't pay the 30, but I don't see a problem, with the person asking. And in fact, a lot has changed. When I, joined this company 10 years ago, the laws in California were different. I remember being asked, like, what was I making at my previous company, and then they asked to see a pay stub. They asked to see a pay stub. I mean, why do you need to see my pay stub? So you can offer me the same amount of money to go join your company? It's crazy. So now you cannot, right? You cannot. I mean, some people still do, but you cannot ask somebody what they make.
Yeah,
So-
that's illegal. That's illegal here. Yes, in California. I don't think all the states, but all the states aren't participating, but California is one of the states that it's illegal. Ben, do you have any comment on that? And I know if you can negotiate more money, then what Justin was saying, that free money that where the employer will match that retirement also affects. That's additional beyond the salary.
Yeah, I would say
Mm-hmm.
one thing from kind of my angle with budgeting, one thing I'd really look at, and I think that gets overlooked, is how much money is it going to cost you to go to work? The biggest, most obvious one, and it's different in different places, but your commute, right? Because whether you are taking a train or a bus or a car or a gondola or whatever you're taking, right? It probably costs you money to do it. If you're driving a car, especially, it's not just the gas in your car, it's also the wear and tear on your car. You're adding miles to your car, which is accelerating the rate at which it's going to need repairs, right? So, I mean, this is my case. I've worked at jobs where I had to commute 50 minutes, 37 miles. You can tell I'm from the Midwest because I can cover 37 miles in 50 minutes. But I had to drive a great distance, and I added so many miles to my car, and I paid so much money in gas. I calculated it. I work remotely now, so that's not an issue because my commute is to my living room, or my office. But it was costing me thousands of dollars a year just to go to the place that was going to pay me money. So if you're looking at job offers, that is something to consider. If you have to go a great distance, first of all, consider that and factor that into the salary. If one place is going to pay you this amount, but it's 5 minutes from where you live, and this place is going to pay you $2,000 more, but it's an hour from where you live, those salaries kind of even out in the long run. And that's something you can bring to the table too. It's like, hey, I would love to work here. I think this would be a great place to work. It is going to cost me more to get here though. And I would love to see compensation for that. And if you can present those numbers and you do a little bit of research, I think that might be something that you can use to your advantage when you're considering those job offers.
Thanks, Ben. So I'm going to ask one last question, then we're going to turn it over to the audience. We got a lot of great questions in the Q&A section. And this question, we all know that hindsight is what? 2020, right? If we look back, we can see clearly. So my question will start with Justin and this is the same question for all three of our panelists. What financial advice, Justin, would you give your younger self?
I think I love at the end of the day, right? Like your financial security is going to come from discipline, right? It's not choosing this investment over this investment. It comes from discipline. It's about being smart about consistently paying off debt, It's smart about having, as been, talked about a lot, having the emergency fund available to be able to utilize for hiccups that come along the road that are unexpected. And then it's about, that money that's in excess of your emergency fund that you're consistently investing. And I want to make sure I use the word investing and not saving, right? Because I think of them differently. I think of saving as cash in the bank account or cash underneath your pillow or cash in your piggy bank if you're still young enough to have one, that is not earning interest and growing. That's saving, right? And it's great to save, but it's even better to invest, right? I see it all the time where I have a person that's, looking to become my client. They're retiring at age 65 and they have a house that they own that grew, that had a strong return over the 30 years they lived in it. And they never sold the house because they're like, hey, this is where I live. Why would I sell it, right? But they benefited from the appreciation of that house. That's one thing they have. The second thing they have is their 401k, where, whether they were, risk averse, super scary about the market, or super aggressive in the market, they just put money into it every single 2 weeks and didn't think about it. And that money was invested and grew, right? And that's like their big non-house asset, right? And usually that's it. That's all they have at age 65, right? So what's paramount is to be able to treat your other assets like your 401k, right? So if you have an IRA, you have a non-retirement investment account, if you could just, even if it's modest, even if it's $50 a week, $50 a month, whatever it is, make it like clockwork, right? Do the budgeting exercise like Ben is talking about in terms of understanding how much you can be investing each month, but then make it automated, right? We're in 2022 now, right? You don't need to manually do a $50 contribution to your investment account and then choose an investment, every single week to be able to put money to work consistently, right? There's a bunch of places out there where you can very, very cheaply establish an account, whether it be an IRA account or a non-retirement investment account, where you can put automated transfers from your checking account to that investment account. And as soon as that cash hits, that money is going to be invested and going to grow for you long term. So you can be that person when you're 65 years old that has the house that appreciated a lot, the 401k appreciated a lot, but also the IRA that appreciated that you invested in every single year, and that non-retirement investment account that you continue to invest into every single year as well. And they're all going to be of great magnitude because you treated everything like your 401k, where regardless of what's happening in Ukraine, interest rates, inflation, whatever it is, you just put the money into work and forgot about it, right? And the only way that works is you stay disciplined, and most importantly, you have the emergency fund that Ben talked about. So if there are any hiccups, you don't need to pull from those accounts. You can keep those as is and have them keep working and leverage the cash emergency fund that you have set to the side. It's okay to not earn money, right, and not earn interest rate on a segment of your investments, right? That's your emergency fund. It's okay not earning anything from that because it allows you to have everything else work for you long term. So I would, like, if I was younger myself, I would establish all those accounts from the get-go as soon as I, graduated, and started making contributions every single 2 weeks, even if it was only like $10, just to get in the habit of doing so, and then upping that amount as I got more and more discretionary income.
Excellent. Leslie?
I think Justin gave some great advice, and I would have to say the same thing here, which is really staying disciplined. So my younger self, I think I was like, especially when I first started getting exposed to the markets, I was like, oh, this is fun, and I can make lots of money. And I don't know, a lot of investors kind of get greedy, and I probably was in my younger 20s, and I probably traded way too much and tried to time the market and did a lot of buying and selling and buying and selling. And then you realize, oh, you're not that smart. Nobody is. And the prudent thing really is to just take the appropriate amount of risk and have a long-term outlook. It's not, oh my gosh, I want to double my money, in the next year. And then the other thing that as you start investing, you start to also be more cognizant of everybody has these behavioral biases that kind of get in the way. And so I would say learn what those biases that you have. So one of the most common things I'm hearing today is like, oh my God, the markets is doing horrible. I want out, sell everything. And so investors tend to panic, right? Especially those maybe that are little less experienced. Even experienced investors sometimes they just panic. And so my question is always like, well, okay, like one client I talked to recently, he said, I'll get back in when the markets are doing better. And I'm thinking, wait, that makes no sense. You're going to sell out now when you know it's low, and then you're going to buy back in when it's high. So that's when discipline really comes in, right? Investing requires a lot of discipline.
And I would say too, not buying everything you see and not trying to keep up with other people. And even if somebody asks you for a dinner you can't afford, politely saying no. Right? Staying true to your budget and your goals, your financial goals. Ben, what advice would you give your younger self?
Oh, wow. I would say two things. First, we hear a lot that time is money, and sure. But I think something we don't think about is that money is time. So think about if you're, and maybe some of you aren't working a job yet, but when you are working a job, at some point you can calculate how much am I making an hour? If you're an hourly job or you're at a salary job, you can work that out. So if I'm making, say, 20 bucks an hour and I buy a $200 game console or pair of shoes or whatever, that cost me 10 hours of work. That's the translation, right? If I work 20 bucks an hour and I spend $200, 10 hours of work. And so that's something to think about, because that feels different, because we've all, if you've worked a shift, you know what an hour of work feels like. Sometimes it's great, sometimes it's not great, but it's work, right? And when you start thinking about it that way, that this thing I'm buying translates to, I did this much work, that is going to change how you see things. And especially if you're looking at debt, when you're looking at, I can't fully afford this thing, I'm gonna have to pay this off. How many hours of work, how many months, how many years of work is it gonna take me to pay off this loan, this credit card, whatever it is? That's a big perspective shift, I think. And it's one that's helped me quite a bit. The other thing I would say, and this is more particular to my personality, but maybe some people are like me in this. I'm the kind of person who, when I know something is going wrong, or I know there's a problem, or I suspect there's a problem, my gut tendency is to just avoid it, to kind of try and ignore it and hope it resolves itself. So when I was in college and a little bit after college, that was pretty much how I did money. I didn't really look at my bank account because I was terrified of what it was going to look like. I did not look at my student loans. I didn't know how much I owed because I didn't want to know. And I thought, if I did that, then I wouldn't be thinking about money. I wouldn't be worrying about money. But when you do that, when you just kind of hide those problems from yourself, you're thinking about it all the time. It's just running in the back of your head, right? It is so stressful to treat your debit card like a gift card and just be like, we'll see how much is on this and hope that there's enough, right? It is very scary when you don't know where you are with money, or when you know that you're in a bad spot with money, to look that in the face and try and make a plan. It is scary to face that scarcity, but it is much less stressful than just kind of not knowing. It's often a lot worse than you think it is too. And also it's, when you address that scarcity, that's when you really clarify your priorities, right? It's like the last 5 minutes of an NBA game. That's when everything counts. Is you know you only have this much money. So now you're really thinking, where do I really want these dollars to go? So whatever it is, whether you feel fine about your money or whether you feel like you're in a bad situation, awareness is the first step towards making any kind of change, whether it's building your wealth through investments or whether it's getting out of debt. You need to face your situation first. So if you haven't, or you're afraid to, that's the challenge that I would give myself, because that's where I was at. It was just being afraid of my money. And if you're afraid of your money, then you're not going to be able to make a change ultimately.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. That's all great advice that you would give your younger selves. So we have, hopefully we have some students here who will heed all of your great advice and go forward with that. So one of our first questions is, I'm living on student loans and a part-time job now, but I keep hearing that I should start investing right away. Does that make sense for my current situation, or should I wait until I have a full-time job and higher income to start investing? And I don't know, who would like to take that question? Justin?
Sure, I'll take it. I'll take it. You know, I firmly believe, especially with all the advancements in investment products and firms that allow you to be able to get your feet wet at very low nominal amounts. It's not mutually exclusive, right? You can do it all, right? I mean, even if like I mentioned before, like even if you're only investing like, you know, $50 a month, right? And then IRA account if you're working, or a non-retirement investment account if you don't really do so, you're still in the game, right? And if you look at the domino effect of that and the power of compounding that Leslie mentioned before, that still will end up being, you know, quite amount over time, you know, quite a big amount over time. So I would not think of those in, you know, as a mutual as either or. You can do them all. I would just position more of my discretionary income towards debt or savings based off of the calculation that we discussed before, weighing the interest rates and weighing the potential returns on the investments, and also wanting to establish an emergency fund so you can fall back on that cash should something out of you know, unplanned come up.
Anyone else want to add to that, or are we good on that question? That was a great answer. Okay, question number 2. If you are no longer a student and haven't had a credit card before, when is a good time to apply and increase the odds of getting a credit card or even a secure card? When should they get a credit card if they've graduated and they've never had one?
I'll hop on that one. So I would say, one, I would first of all take a look inside yourself real quick to see if you think you can handle that, or maybe ask people that you trust if you can handle that. I do recommend getting a credit card, and actually one of the things that's built into YNAB that I think is really great is we have it built in such a way that you can use a credit card consistently without going into debt. So that's something I'd recommend for people who are starting out. But I would say if you feel that you can handle that responsibility, then I would say doing it as soon as possible. One thing you can do potentially that can help build your credit score that doesn't actually require you to hop on a card immediately is to become an authorized user on someone else's credit card. That's a common thing that I know a lot of people do is parents will often put one of their children as an authorized user on a card, and that will actually build your credit score, even if you are not actually using the card, or even if you are just using it to pump gas or something like that. There are a lot of options out there for people who want to get into a credit card, even if they don't have much of a credit score. And yeah, I would say even if you're someone who isn't sure if you would be very responsible with a credit card, a great way to handle that is just pick one thing you're going to use it for and just pay that off. Maybe this is the card you use to buy gas and then you pay it off. That is going to get you on your way to having a good credit score. And also too, having student loans is also beneficial for your credit score. So if you have student loans, when you start making payments on those, that will also have a positive impact. But that's my 2 cents on that.
Okay, great. We have another question here. How do I start investing if I'm a beginner? I use Robinhood, but haven't had the best of luck investing.
I can jump in here. So I say just keep it simple. Really, you know, you're not trying to hit a home run. And if you're starting with a relatively small amount, it's hard to get the, you know, diversification unless you invest in a vehicle such as a exchange traded fund or a mutual fund where you can get appropriate diversification at a small amount. So that's where I would start. A lot of people can tend to be attracted to, you know, the things that sound sexy and hot. And I would not recommend that. Like, you know, of course, everybody right now, all they want to learn about is, you know, Bitcoin. That's not what we recommend. We think, you know, if you're just getting started, you should invest in something that has been around and has a good reputation.
Excellent, excellent advice. Okay, here's another question. Given the potential for another recession in the US, what percentage of someone's savings would you recommend investing in the stock market? I guess that would be Justin or, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I can go with it. I mean, first of all, like I always tell my clients, I'm not investing any money in the stock market. I'm not investing any money really that we don't have conviction that we can stay invested for multiple years, right? Like the benchmark for the the benchmark for the stock market, the U.S. stock market is called the S&P 500, and like historically, the probability that goes up on a daily basis is about 50%, right? It's like it's a flip of the coin, right? If you're investing in one day, you're completely gambling. It's almost the same odds as Vegas, right? If you are investing for 10 years, the probability that S&P 500 is going to be positive is over 90%, right? So as long as your time horizon, the amount of time that you can keep that money invested is, multiple years and hopefully 10 plus years, you have a very, 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 very strong chance that it's going to work out well, even if we were to go into a recession 2 months after you put the money to work, right? Many of you may not have been around investing during like 07, 08, right? But at that time, there was a big recession that took place. The stock market plummeted over like 50%, right? The stock market, not even including like dividends and interest, rebounded at that same level in less than 6 years, right? And that was like, probably like one of the worst case scenarios we could envision, right? So as long as you have that long time to work for you, you can put the money to work. And it doesn't, like, I wouldn't try to speculate recession, things of that sort, because who would have known when the global pandemic took place in 2020 that at the end of the year, the stock market would still be up by over 20%, right? Like, and we hit a recession during that time span. It was just the shortest recession ever, right? So, don't try to speculate when to put money in, when to pull money out. I mean, keep in mind that in order to try to time the market, and have a lot of success in that, not only do you have to be correct about when you take the money out, you also have to be correct about when you put the money back in. And to be able to determine both of those at a high level is nearly impossible. So, just as talking before, stay consistent, have a budget, have a plan, have an emergency fund. And if you have that money work for you long term, don't be concerned. I mean, at the end of the day, like, it's terrible what's taking place in Ukraine and with interest rates, increasing and inflation rate. There's some really nasty stuff that's happening right now. But at the end of the day, if we fast forward to April 19th of 2032, what's happening right now is not going to have much impact on where the market is a decade from now, right? That would be a thing of the past that no one think about, that people forgot even took place from a financial standpoint.
Thank you. So Leslie, you already answered this. This question is investing in digital currency like Bitcoin, yes or no? You say you invest in what's tried and true. You just said that, didn't you?
Yes. How I knew this is last year I went to Vegas. I was out there for one of my daughter's dance competitions, and I remember having to jump into an Uber, and the Uber driver started talking to me about how much money he's made, on Bitcoin. And I'm thinking, okay, if my Uber driver is talking to me about this, there's something wrong here. If he's made so much money, he probably wouldn't be an Uber driver, right?
That's right.
So it's one of those things that, how do we value Bitcoin? Does anybody know how to value Bitcoin? Well, how do you know what to invest in? Typically, we invest in securities that we know have growth potential and that we can value and say, okay, the intrinsic value of the stock is X dollars, and right now it's trading below that, and so this is a good buying opportunity. But if you can't value Bitcoin, how do you know if it's at what price is it a good buy? So I just think, sure, have people made a lot of money? Absolutely. But for me, it's about, again, just, sticking with the basics. In fact, our company, we don't even allow purchases of that for our clients because at this point, we just don't know enough about it.
Great advice. And we have on this call tonight, we have some aspiring home buyers. And there was one question that said, do I get a loan for my down payment, or how do I do that? They want to know about a down payment. Do they need a loan? Another person in that same vein said, where do you recommend putting aside home payment money if I want to buy a house in 5 years? So down payments, they have a question about down payments when you're buying a piece of real estate. And if your plan is in 5 years to buy a piece of real estate, where do you place that money? Ben, do you want to take a stab at that? And
I can take a kind of minor stab at it. That's a little outside of my place, but I would say one of the things is bear in mind, if you take out a loan for a down payment, that just interest exists. And so you're going to have interest on your mortgage and you're going to have interest on your down payment. So that's going to cost you a lot more in the long run. And this kind of comes into a similar place of trying to time the market. I know a lot of people that I know are buying up houses because, you know, houses have been going up in value. I know that was something I would talk to an expert about before you go take out a personal loan or something to try and do a down payment. As far as like where to put money that you're saving up for 5 years, there are a lot of options out there. It kind of depends on how liquid you need that money to be. What I would certainly say is keep your down payment separate from your emergency fund or from your emergency stuff. If those are pooled together and you lock it up in a certificate of deposit or a bond or something like that, then that could potentially be a bad situation. But I would say what you want to look at, and probably Justin or Leslie can speak to this more than I can, what you want to look at is something that has very low risk, but is going to do you better than a savings account at a bank. Because the reality is, I mean, in a normal good year, inflation is somewhere between 2 to 4%, and a savings account earns 0.1, 0.5, maybe 1%. So if you put it in a savings account, ultimately you're losing to inflation. So you want to find something that's able to get you up over inflation without being quite as volatile as a stock. So someone else could probably speak more specifically to that, but that's kind of my general advice.
Yeah, I'll piggyback that. I mean, I'm a CPA, so I'm like pretty risk averse by nature. So I'm probably, less risky than the average financial advisor. But if it's like a 5 years before, a house purchase, maybe I'll invest in like something that is, has a little bit higher return potential than a straight savings account, right? But not as potential, but probably not as risky as like a full stock portfolio, right? But I'll probably kind of balance it, right, based off of that time horizon. But once I get close to like the 2-year mark, or like you're 2 years away from that house purchase, then I would convert to be a very, very, very conservative, like money market account, CD account. So that's how I was thinking about it, like be a little bit like moderate 5 years out, and then kind of once you get to that 2-year, 1-year mark, be very, very conservative. And what I really recommend is that you do two things. This is what I did when I bought my house. Is one, I created as Ben mentioned, I created my own separate account for my house down payment fund. And what was really powerful for me, because like we talked before, everything is about discipline, everything is psychological, everything is emotional, right? In terms of like your finances, right? Naming the account my house down payment fund was awesome, right? I had a regular savings account, and instead of it being my checking account named checking, it was a savings account named house down payment, right? So then I named it. I never touched it. I never pulled out money from it for anything that was not my house down payment, because I feel terrible, right? I feel terrible moving, $200 from my house down payment fund to my checking account and put it on, Red 3 and roulette, right? Or pay it for drinks in downtown LA, right? I'm not going to do that, right? So that's a great psychological step, is to name it so that you, only utilize it for that one opportunity. And then secondly, it's about consistently, transferring assets to it, right? So doing the calculations that Ben's talking about through him and his company and the software, so that you figure out what you need to transfer to it on a consistent basis, and then make it automated, right? Every 2 weeks or every 2 months, twice a month, or whenever you get paid, have that money automatically go from your checking account to this house down payment fund. The benefit of like having that automated saving, right? Like if you kind of figure out your plan, right? Figure out what you need to be able to be comfortable, and you find out you need to do, $100 a month to your house down payment fund, $200 to your 401k, right? And maybe another, couple dollars towards this debt, right? Or towards a student loan payment, whatever, right? Then that you're saving first, right? And you're putting yourself in a position to be successful financially. So that remaining money in your checking account outside your emergency fund, you should feel a lot more empowered to do with it as you please, right? Go on the trip to, Paris you've always wanted to go on, right? Buy the new, Madden NFL game on PS5, right? Like, enjoy life, right? And if you save first and you have a plan, you stick to that plan, and your savings and paying are automatically automated, it will allow you to feel a whole lot more empowered with the money left in your checking to fully enjoy and not feel bad about doing it, knowing you've already paid yourself first.
Excellent, excellent. I have another question. A PhD student in LA, most of us are, as PhD students in LA, we're mostly living at the poverty level. The majority of our money going to rent. What investment advice do you have for those of us operating on an extremely tight budget where every penny counts?
Well, I'll just hop in briefly here. I would say, I think this applies to investing, and I think it also applies to paying down debt. Because where a lot of people get in trouble with either of those things is they get really excited about it and they put a ton of money into it. The nice thing about investing is at least you can get that money back theoretically, whether it's later or whether you're pulling out at a penalty. But when you're paying it down to student loans or whatever it is, that money is gone. And what happens with a lot of people is they do that, and then all of a sudden something happens, right? The car does break down or something goes wrong, and now they don't, because they put all that money into debt or into investments. Now they can't afford to pay that thing back without using debt. So then, because they were doing a good thing, they were trying to invest or trying to pay down debt. Now they're accruing, credit card debt and having to pay that back because they didn't prepare for these potential unexpected emergencies. So what I would say, and I think Justin has said this a few times, that having, we talk about before you have a debt pay down plan, you need to have a debt prevention plan. So before you go off to the races to do these things, you want to make sure you have the cushion, the cash cushion, to make sure that if something happens, you have the flexibility to deal with it, so that you're not pulling out those investments early and getting hit with a fee, or you're not, putting things on a credit card or whatever it is. I would say that is key. I would say focus on those monthly bills, focus on building up for those non-monthly bills, and then start looking at those other things when you have that flexibility in place.
Well, that's our last question for this evening. I want to be mindful of time, and I want to thank our esteemed panelists, Ben Markley, Leslie Chang, and Justin Lacey, for an amazing conversation. Thank you. They allowed us to record it so that we can share it with the Trojan family, and others can take advantage of all the sage advice that you all have given us on debt management, money management, emergency funds, investing, credit scores, just, investing in sound sources. And so we just thank you for that. And there are people that wanted to connect with you all, so I'm going to recommend that they send you a LinkedIn request. They want to connect in with you and learn more. And yes, thank you again. And as we say here at USC, Ben, we got to teach you this. Put your 2 fingers up. We say, fight on, everyone. Fight on. Okay, take care. Fight on, Leslie. Fight on, Justin.
Yeah. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Laurie.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Jen.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. See ya. Bye-bye.
Jen.
Mhm.